You'll leave with the clothes on your back and nothing else.
You should have read what you signed.
This house belongs to me.
No.
It has belonged to me for 3 years. Now pack a bag and get out of my house.
You'll leave with the clothes on your back and nothing else, Raphael sneered, tossing the divorce papers onto our immaculate granite kitchen island. He thought he held every single card. He didn't know that 3 years ago, I had already quietly, legally rewritten the ending to his arrogant little script. To understand the absolute audacity of my husband's ultimatum, you have to understand the house on Crestview Lane. It wasn't just a structure of glass, steel, and imported Italian stone. It was a monument to Raphael's ego, and by extension, the gilded cage I had allowed myself to be locked inside for a decade. We built it from the ground up during our 7th year of marriage, right after his commercial real estate firm finally broke into the 9-figure territory. Raphael was a man who demanded perfection in every facet of his existence. His suits were bespoke, his cars were German, and his wife, me, Caroline, was expected to be a flawless, silent accessory who managed his domestic empire without ever asking questions. But it hadn't always been that way. When we met, Raphael was drowning in student debt from his MBA, and I was working double shifts as a physical therapist to keep our tiny 2-bedroom apartment afloat. I paid for his first business suits. I packed his lunches. I deferred my own dreams of opening a wellness clinic so he could take the massive financial risks required to launch his firm. "We're a team, Caroline," he used to say, kissing my forehead late at night while I rubbed his exhausted shoulders. "When I make it, we make it. I'll build you a castle." He built the castle, all right. But somewhere along the climb to the top of the city's elite social ladder, the we dissolved entirely into I. As Raphael's wealth grew, so did his need for absolute control. It started subtly. He suggested I quit my job because his colleagues' wives didn't work, and it looked bad for a man of his stature to have a wife clocking in for an hourly wage. Reluctantly, I agreed, believing I was supporting his image. Within 6 months, my financial independence was entirely eradicated. I was placed on a strict household allowance. If I bought a dress that wasn't pre-approved, or if the grocery bill was $50 higher than usual, he would summon me to his mahogany-paneled home office for a performance review of our finances. He held the money over my head like a guillotine. Whenever we argued, his favorite trump card was a sweeping gesture around our massive, vaulted living room. "My money pays for this roof," he would say, his voice dripping with condescension. "My genius bought this furniture. My sweat keeps you dripping in diamonds. Don't ever forget whose name is on the deed." And he was right about that. When we closed on the Crestview property, Raphael had brought a sleazy corporate lawyer friend of his, Jonathan Crane, to handle the paperwork. Raphael told me it was necessary for liability protection and complex tax sheltering to put the house entirely in the name of a holding company he solely controlled. I was naive. I was trusting. I signed the quitclaim deeds without a second thought, effectively signing away my rights to my own home. I believed my husband was protecting our future. I didn't realize he was building a fortress to keep me out. For years, I played the part of the dutiful society wife. I hosted the lavish dinner parties, making sure the vintage Bordeaux was breathing at exactly the right temperature. I smiled politely when his chauvinistic partners made off-color jokes, and I looked the other way when Raphael's temper flared over minor inconveniences, like the pool water being 2 degrees too cold. I convinced myself that this was simply the price of luxury. I had safety, I had comfort, and I had a husband who, despite his flaws, was providing for me. But a house, no matter how beautiful, absorbs the energy of the people inside it. The sprawling corridors felt increasingly cold. The towering windows that looked out over the manicured lawns felt less like a view and more like the glass walls of an enclosure. I was 34 years old, utterly isolated, entirely financially dependent, and deeply, achingly lonely. And then came the rainy Tuesday in October that shattered the illusion forever, setting the stage for a game of chess Raphael didn't even know we were playing. It was 3 years ago. Raphael was ostensibly in London for a week-long symposium on urban development. I had decided to use the quiet time to do a deep clean of the house, including his sacred home office. Raphael hated when the cleaning staff touched his desk, so I usually took it upon myself to dust the endless shelves of architectural awards and leather-bound books. While wiping down the base of his massive oak desk, my cloth snagged on something sharp underneath the bottom drawer. I crouched down and ran my hand along the polished wood. There, taped meticulously to the underside of the drawer out of plain sight, was a heavy-duty waterproof flash drive. A cold prickle of unease washed over the back of my neck. Raphael was a man of the cloud. He scoffed at physical media. Why would he hide a flash drive with the paranoia of a spy? My hands trembled as I took the drive upstairs to my personal laptop. I told myself it was probably just off-book corporate blueprints, something boring and heavily redacted. But the moment the files populated on my screen, the breath was knocked entirely out of my lungs. It wasn't blueprints. It was a digital roadmap of a betrayal so deep and calculated it made my blood run cold. The first folder contained a lease agreement for a luxury penthouse downtown. The tenant listed was Amanda Reed Raphael's 26-year-old protégé, a junior marketing director at his firm whom he had frequently praised for her hustle. The lease was paid in full, wire transferred from an offshore account I had never seen before. The second folder was worse. It contained hundreds of intimate photos, explicit text screenshots, and vacation itineraries to places he had told me he was going for solo business retreats. They had been sleeping together for over 2 years. In one text exchange, Amanda complained about me. "Amanda, how much longer do I have to pretend to respect that boring housewife of yours?" Raphael, "Soon, babe. Jonathan is finalizing the asset protection now. By the time I drop the papers on her, she won't have a dime to fight me with. She'll have to crawl back to her miserable little physical therapy clinic." I sat in the glow of the laptop screen for 4 hours, paralyzed by a mixture of profound grief and a terrifying white-hot rage. He didn't just want to leave me for a younger woman. He wanted to ruin me. He wanted to punish me for being the woman who knew him when he was nothing, the woman who had paid his way, the woman who was a walking reminder that he wasn't always a god among men. Most women would have called him right then. Most women would have packed their bags, hired a divorce lawyer, and demanded half. But I knew Raphael. I knew his power, his connections, and his utter ruthlessness. If I confronted him then, he would trigger whatever legal traps Jonathan Crane had set. He would freeze our joint accounts, lock me out of the house, and bury me under a mountain of litigation until I surrendered out of sheer bankruptcy. I couldn't just fight him. I had to outsmart him. The next morning, I took the flash drive to Patricia Davies. Patricia wasn't a flashy billboard divorce attorney. She was a quiet, lethal corporate litigator who specialized in dismantling complex financial webs. A woman I had secretly met at a charity gala who possessed a reputation for destroying arrogant men. Sitting in her unassuming, windowless office, I laid out the evidence. Patricia clicked through the files, her face completely impassive, until she reached the folder detailing his asset-hiding strategies. "Your husband is a textbook narcissist, Caroline," Patricia said softly, closing the laptop. "He thinks he's the smartest man in any room. He thinks the law is a suggestion for people in his tax bracket, but his arrogance is incredibly sloppy." She explained that while Raphael had put the house in a holding company, the company's operating agreement, which she pulled from state records, had a massive, glaring loophole. Because the initial seed money for his firm had come from a joint account to which my physical therapy paychecks had contributed all those years ago, marital property laws in our state could theoretically pierce the corporate veil, but fighting it in court would take years, and Raphael had the capital to drag it out. "We don't fight him in court," I told her, my voice eerily calm. "I want the house. I want the asset he loves more than anything else. How do I take it before he even knows it's gone?" Patricia's lips curled into a predatory smile. Over the next week, we hatched a plan that required nerves of absolute steel. Raphael was in the process of refinancing a massive commercial loan for a new shopping district. He was stressed, overworked, and constantly flying into rages at his staff. He frequently brought stacks of documents home for me to organize, sign as a witness, and overnight back to Jonathan Crane. He never read them when he was at home. He viewed domestic time as his time to drink scotch and complain, assuming Jonathan had bulletproofed everything. Patricia drafted a very specific document, an irrevocable spousal trust transfer. It was formatted exactly like the indemnification and refinancing papers Jonathan usually sent. The typography, the margins, the legal jargon on the first page, it was a flawless visual match for his corporate paperwork. But buried within the dense legal text was a binding agreement that transferred the total ownership of the Crestview Lane property from his holding company directly into an irrevocable trust. The sole trustee and sole beneficiary of that trust? Caroline Mitchell, me. Furthermore, the document explicitly waived any right Raphael had to contest the transfer in the event of a divorce, classifying the home as a post-nuptial gift to protect it from his impending commercial loan liabilities. When Raphael returned from London, he was exhausted and foul-tempered. On a Thursday evening, he was 4 scotches deep, screaming on his phone at a contractor. I walked into his office with a stack of papers. Patricia's document slipped perfectly into the middle. A mobile notary, a trusted contact of Patricia's who posed as an executive courier, was waiting in the foyer. "I need your signature on these refi amendments for Jonathan," I said, my voice perfectly pitched to that of a submissive, helpful wife. "The courier needs to take them right now." Raphael glared at me, annoyed by the interruption. "Just put them down. Can't you see I'm handling a disaster here?" "Jonathan said it has to be tonight, Raphael. The notary is waiting." Grumbling, Raphael kept the phone clamped to his ear. He grabbed his Mont Blanc pen and began aggressively scrawling his signature on the flagged sticky notes I had placed on the pages. Sign, flip, sign, flip, sign, initial, flip. He didn't read a single word. He didn't notice the subtle shift in the document title. He didn't notice that he was signing away his multi-million-dollar castle. The notary stamped the documents. I handed them to her, and she walked out the door. Just like that, the deed was done. The house was unconditionally, irrevocably mine, but I couldn't leave yet. Patricia needed time to untangle the rest of his finances and secure my legal half of his actual liquid assets, which required me to stay married, stay quiet, and play the long game. They say hell is a place of fire and brimstone, but I learned that hell is actually living in a 10,000 square foot mansion with a man whose touch makes your skin crawl, knowing he goes straight from your bed to the bed of a woman 10 years your junior. For 1,095 days, I was the undisputed Academy Award winner of Oak Brook. The psychological toll of pretending everything was perfect was immense. Every morning, I woke up, put on my expensive silk robes, and brewed Raphael's espresso just the way he liked it. I kissed him goodbye. I wished him luck at work. And the moment his car cleared the security gates, I would go to my secure laptop and begin my real work. Under Patricia's guidance, I started documenting everything. I found the passwords to his secondary email accounts. I photographed the receipts he carelessly left in his suit pockets. Every time he transferred money to Amanda or bought her a piece of jewelry, I logged it in a spreadsheet. In our state, dissipation of marital assets, spending joint money on an affair, meant that every dollar he spent on her would have to be reimbursed to me out of his share of the estate during the divorce. He was essentially buying me out with every lavish gift he bought his mistress. The hardest part, however, wasn't the financial espionage. It was the social humiliation I had to endure. As Raphael's business grew more successful, his ego swelled to monstrous proportions, and his discretion vanished. He started bringing Amanda to corporate events. At the firm's annual holiday gala, during the second year of my undercover operation, I found myself standing in a circle of his partners' wives, holding a glass of champagne, while Raphael stood not 10 feet away, laughing raucously with his hand resting entirely too low on Amanda's back. She wore a diamond tennis bracelet that I knew for a fact cost $40,000, because I had forwarded the receipt to Patricia 2 weeks prior. Amanda caught my eye across the room and gave me a sickeningly sweet, pitying smile. She genuinely thought I was a pathetic, clueless old woman, clinging to a man who didn't want me anymore. "Just smile, Caroline," I told myself, digging my nails into my palms until they nearly bled. "Let them think you're blind. Let them think you're weak." When we got home that night, Raphael was drunk and belligerent. "You embarrassed me tonight," he slurred, loosening his tie as we stood in the kitchen. "You just stood there like a statue. You have no charisma, Caroline. No spark. You're just plain." "I'm sorry, Raphael," I whispered, keeping my eyes downcast. "I had a headache. I didn't mean to reflect poorly on you." He scoffed, pouring himself another drink. "You're lucky I'm a loyal man. Any other guy in my position would have traded you in for a newer model years ago. You bring absolutely nothing to the table." I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and went upstairs. I locked myself in the master bathroom, turned on the shower to muffle the sound, and cried until I was gasping for air. I hated him so much it felt like a physical poison in my veins. But every time I wanted to scream, every time I wanted to throw his infidelity in his face and storm out, I thought of the end goal. I thought of the moment the trap would finally snap shut. During the third year, the economic climate began to shift. Interest rates skyrocketed, and Raphael's aggressive commercial developments started facing serious headwinds. Several of his massive loans were called in, and the firm's cash flow tightened dramatically. This is when Raphael's behavior escalated from dismissive to openly hostile. He was terrified of losing his empire, and he took out every ounce of his stress on me. He cut off my credit cards without warning. When I asked him how I was supposed to buy groceries, he threw $100 bill at me and told me to figure it out. He stopped coming home for dinner entirely, spending his nights at Amanda's penthouse under the guise of late nights at the office, trying to save this company. What he didn't know was that while his commercial empire was teetering, my personal fortress was fully secured. Patricia had managed to quietly freeze the irrevocable trust. No matter what happened to his business, his creditors couldn't touch the house on Crestview Lane, because technically, Raphael Mitchell no longer owned it. I did. And because I had no connection to his LLCs or his debts, the house was a financial island, safe from the incoming storm. As our 10th wedding anniversary approached, the atmosphere in the house was radioactive. I knew the end was coming. He was moving assets rapidly, desperately trying to liquidate what he could to save his flagship projects, while simultaneously finalizing his escape hatch with Jonathan Crane. On a Tuesday afternoon, Patricia called me. Her voice, usually professional and detached, held a note of dark triumph. "Caroline, he just filed," she said. "Jonathan Crane just submitted the divorce petition to the county clerk. They're going to try to blindside you. He's going to serve you at the house, likely within the next 48 hours. They've also filed an emergency motion to seize all marital bank accounts." "Let them," I said, staring out the window at the Olympic-sized swimming pool Raphael had built. "My personal accounts are secured, right?" "Bulletproof," Patricia confirmed. "We have him, Caroline. We have every single thread." I hung up the phone and felt a profound, eerie calm settle over my body. The 3 years of pretending, the thousands of hours of swallowing my pride, the tears, the anxiety, it was all evaporating. That evening, I cooked his favorite meal, a massive ribeye steak with a red wine reduction. I set the table perfectly. I poured the expensive wine. I knew the performance was in its final act. Raphael came home late, as usual. He didn't greet me. He didn't even take off his coat before walking straight into the kitchen, a thick manila envelope clutched in his hand. His face was a mask of cold, hard arrogance. He looked at the dinner I had prepared, looked at me, and tossed the envelope onto the granite island. It landed with a heavy, definitive smack. "We're done, Caroline," he said, his voice flat, devoid of a single ounce of 10 years of shared history. "I've outgrown you. I've outgrown this marriage. Sign these papers by tomorrow morning, and I might give you enough cash to rent a decent apartment." I looked at the envelope. I didn't reach for it. I simply looked back up at him. "And if I don't sign them?" I asked, keeping my voice small, playing the terrified victim one last time. He leaned across the island, his eyes cold and predatory. "If you try to fight me, I will crush you. My lawyers have ensured that everything, the firm, the accounts, and this house belongs to me. You are entitled to absolutely zero." That was when he delivered the line that would loop in my head for the rest of my life. "You'll leave with the clothes on your back and nothing else." The silence that followed his statement was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating quiet that precedes a catastrophic storm. Raphael stood tall, chest puffed out in his tailored Tom Ford suit, waiting for the inevitable tears, the begging, the desperate pleas for a second chance that he had undoubtedly scripted in his mind. He expected me to shatter into a million pieces right there on the pristine hardwood floor. Instead, I reached for my wine glass, took a slow, deliberate sip of the Cabernet, and smiled. It wasn't a small, polite smile. It was a wide, genuine, and entirely predatory grin that reached all the way to my eyes. Raphael's brow furrowed. His arrogant posture faltered for just a fraction of a second. "Are you having a psychotic break, Caroline? Did you not hear a word I just said?" "Oh, I heard you, Raphael," I replied, my voice steady, stripped entirely of the submissive tremor I had weaponized for the past 3 years. I set the wine glass down. I heard every single word. I'm just trying to decide which part of your delusion is the most entertaining. I walked over to the end of the granite island, opened a drawer, and pulled out a thick, black leather portfolio. I tossed it onto the counter, right next to his divorce papers. It landed with an even heavier, more satisfying thud. "What is that?" he demanded, taking a step back as if the folder were venomous. "That," I said, leaning casually against the counter, "is 3 years of homework." He scoffed, though the sound was a little thinner than before. He reached out and flipped open the heavy cover of the portfolio. The very first page was a high-resolution printed photograph of him and Amanda Reed, intimately entangled on a balcony in St. Bart's. It was dated a year and a half ago, during a time he swore he was in Tokyo securing foreign investors. The color drained from Raphael's face so fast I thought he might actually pass out. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I believe her name is Amanda," I continued, savoring the syllables. 26, junior marketing director, though I suppose she's a senior director now, considering you bought her that promotion right around the time you bought her the $90,000 Mercedes AMG, the receipts for which are on page 12, by the way. "How?" he whispered, his eyes frantically scanning the pages as he flipped through them. Spreadsheets, wire transfer confirmations, texts printed in full color. "How did you get this?" "This is illegal. You hacked my devices." "No, Raphael. You taped a waterproof flash drive under your desk like a villain in a cheap spy novel," I corrected him, feeling a surge of adrenaline so powerful it made my fingertips tingle. "I've known about Amanda for 3 years. I know about the downtown penthouse. I know about the offshore accounts Jonathan Crane helped you set up to hide your assets. I know exactly how much marital money you have dissipated on your mistress." Anger, bright and red, flooded back into his cheeks, replacing the shock. His narcissism simply couldn't handle the injury. He slammed the portfolio shut. "You think this saves you?" he roared, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "You think a few pictures and spreadsheets mean anything? I have the best attorneys in the state. Jonathan will bury this. In this state, infidelity doesn't change the division of assets. You are still entitled to nothing. This house is owned by my holding company. My firm is protected. You are going to leave this house tonight, Caroline. Pack your bags. Get out of my house." "Your house?" I repeated softly. "Yes, my house. Paid for by my sweat, my genius, and my money." He was practically spitting, his veneer of civilized superiority completely shattered. I reached into the portfolio, bypassing the sections on his affair and his hidden accounts, and pulled out a single, heavily notarized legal document. I slid it across the smooth granite until it stopped exactly in front of him. "You should really read the things you sign, Raphael," I advised, pouring myself another glass of wine, "especially when you are 4 scotches deep and screaming at contractors on the phone." Raphael stared at the document. It was the irrevocable spousal trust transfer, the one he thought was a refinancing amendment for his commercial loan, the one he had blindly scribbled his signature on 3 years ago. He picked it up, his eyes darting back and forth across the dense legal paragraphs. I watched his lips move slightly as he read the critical clauses. "Hereby transfers in perpetuity all rights, titles, and interests of the Crestview Lane property from the grantor to the sole, unencumbered ownership of the Caroline Mitchell Irrevocable Trust, waiving all rights to contest in the event of marital dissolution." His hands began to shake. The heavy parchment paper rattled audibly in the quiet kitchen. "This is a forgery," he choked out, looking up at me with wild, terrified eyes. "This isn't real. Jonathan didn't draft this." "No, Jonathan didn't," I agreed pleasantly. "Patricia Davies did. You might have heard of her. She's the attorney currently filing a counter-petition that will freeze every single remaining asset you have by tomorrow morning. But the deed to this house, that was transferred, recorded, and sealed at the county clerk's office 36 months ago. You don't own this house, Raphael. Your holding company doesn't own this house. I do. Completely, irrevocably, without a single mortgage attached to it." "You tricked me!" he screamed, lunging forward, slamming his fists onto the granite island. "This is fraud!" "It's not fraud to present your husband with paperwork in his own home. You signed it willingly, in front of a licensed notary public. You just didn't bother to read it because you thought I was too stupid to outsmart you. You thought I was just a plain, boring housewife with no spark." I took a step toward him, closing the distance, refusing to back down from the monster I had feared for a decade. You told me I would leave with the clothes on my back, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. But you see, Raphael, this is my house, and I want you out, right now. Leave the keys to the German cars on the counter. They were purchased with joint funds and are currently frozen. You have 10 minutes to pack a bag and call a cab. If you are not off my property in 15 minutes, I will have the security detail you hired forcibly remove you for trespassing. For a long, agonizing minute, Raphael just stared at me. The arrogant tycoon, the master of the universe, was gone. In his place stood a broken, outsmarted man who suddenly realized he had marched willingly into his own slaughter. He looked around the massive, gorgeous kitchen, up at the custom lighting, out toward the pool, the monuments to his ego that now belonged exclusively to the woman he had tried to discard. He didn't say another word. He turned on his heel, walked mechanically up the stairs, and 10 minutes later, he came back down with a single leather duffel bag. He dropped his heavy ring of keys onto the granite island. The metal clanged sharply. As he walked out the front door into the rainy night to wait for an Uber, I walked over to the security panel, punched in my new master code, and locked the door behind him. The legal battle that ensued over the next 18 months was less of a war and more of a systematic dismantling. True to his nature, Raphael tried to fight. He fired Jonathan Crane, blaming him for the sloppy oversight, and hired a team of ruthless, high-priced litigators to challenge the transfer of the house. They claimed I had used undue influence, that the signature was coerced, that the trust was invalid. But Patricia Davies was an absolute shark in the courtroom. She produced the video recording from the mobile notary's body camera, a standard security measure the notary always used, which clearly showed an uncoerced, albeit agitated, Raphael willingly signing the documents without asking a single question. The judge, an older woman with zero tolerance for corporate arrogance, threw Raphael's motion to invalidate the trust entirely out of court. The house on Crestview Lane was officially untouchable, but losing the house was only the first domino to fall. Raphael's financial empire was built on leverage, debt, and the projection of immense wealth. When word leaked out in the commercial real estate sector that his assets were frozen in a highly contentious, incredibly messy divorce, his investors panicked. The banks that had issued his massive commercial loans called them in. Because I had secured the house in a trust long before his business began to tank, the property was completely shielded from his commercial creditors. The corporate veil he had so proudly constructed to keep me out ended up trapping him inside with his debts. His creditors tore his holding companies to pieces. They seized his office buildings, liquidated his stock portfolios, and repossessed the luxury cars he had bought with company funds. And then came the final financial blow, the dissipation of assets. Patricia presented the court with my meticulously kept spreadsheets. We proved that Raphael had spent over $1.2 million of marital funds on Amanda Reed apartments, vacations, jewelry, and cash transfers. Under state law, Raphael owed me half of that money back from his side of the marital ledger. Since his liquid assets were rapidly draining to pay off creditors and lawyers, the court ordered the forced sale of his only remaining unencumbered asset, his private retirement accounts. He was bled completely dry. And what about Amanda? The brilliant, hustling junior director who thought she had secured a billionaire sugar daddy. The moment Raphael's accounts were frozen and the penthouse lease defaulted because he couldn't make the wire transfers, her devotion mysteriously evaporated. She packed up her designer bags, took the diamond tennis bracelet, and left him. She didn't even leave a note. Last I heard from the industry gossip mill, she had moved to Miami and attached herself to an aging crypto investor. Raphael had traded a loyal wife who helped build him from nothing for a parasite who abandoned him the second the host ran out of blood. The divorce was finalized on a crisp Tuesday morning in November, exactly 4 years after I had found that hidden flash drive. I sat at the polished wooden table in the courthouse, Patricia by my side. When Raphael walked in, I barely recognized him. He was 50 years old, but he looked a decade older. His bespoke Tom Ford suit hung loosely on his shrinking frame, and the arrogant, piercing light in his eyes had been completely extinguished. He looked exhausted, defeated, and hollow. He signed the final decree without looking at me. He didn't have the energy to hurl insults anymore. He was practically destitute, living in a rented condo on the outskirts of the city, facing years of untangling bankruptcy proceedings for his ruined firm. As we walked out of the courthouse and onto the grand stone steps, he stopped and finally looked at me. I was wearing a tailored white suit, radiating health, peace, and absolute freedom. "Are you happy now, Caroline?" he asked, his voice raspy and bitter. "You destroyed me. You took everything." I stopped and looked at the man I had once loved, the man I had once sacrificed my own dreams to support. I felt no pity. I felt no anger. I just felt an overwhelming sense of closure. "I didn't destroy you, Raphael," I said calmly. "Your ego destroyed you. Your greed destroyed you. I just made sure I wasn't collateral damage when the building finally collapsed." I turned and walked away, stepping into the waiting town car that Patricia had hired for us to celebrate. I didn't keep the house on Crestview Lane. I lived in it for another 6 months, enjoying the profound quiet of a space completely cleansed of his toxic presence. But eventually, it felt too big, too echoing, and too rooted in a past I no longer belonged to. I listed it on the market, and within a week, it sold to a tech billionaire for a staggering sum, entirely tax-free within the trust. With those millions, I finally reclaimed the life I had put on hold a decade prior. I opened a state-of-the-art physical therapy and holistic wellness clinic in the heart of the city. I named it Foundation, a nod to the fact that you can only build a strong future if you ensure the ground beneath you is solid and true. Today, my clinic employs a staff of 30 incredible practitioners. I spend my days helping people heal, surrounded by light, positivity, and a community I built with my own two hands. I am financially independent, deeply fulfilled, and infinitely happier than I ever was inside that gilded cage. Sometimes, when the clinic is quiet at the end of the day, I pour myself a cup of tea and think back to that rainy night when a man who thought he owned the world looked at me and told me I would leave with nothing. He was wrong. I left with everything that actually mattered: my dignity, my future, and the ultimate, irrefutable victory of outsmarting the man who thought I was a fool. If this story of ultimate revenge and reclaiming your power kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more incredible real-life drama stories, and share this video with anyone who needs a reminder to never underestimate a quiet woman. Leave a comment below with your favorite moment of karma in the story. We post new thrilling content every single week, so ring the bell to never miss out.